Hello there, beautiful. How are you doing today? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Joesephyr, and in today's Dissidia Opera Omnia Should You Pull video, we're going to be discussing Aerith and her intersecting wills, which will also see the return of Kurasame, which is a LD call that is still very relevant to this day, but are his updates enough to perhaps get him to fit into your party? And how does Aerith's FR sort of pair up with other FRs or FR charger characters like Aerith with the updates that she gets? If you'd like to know more about them and the event that comes with them, then stay tuned and keep on watching. Before we get started, of course, don't forget to check out all of my social media links down in the description box below, including Twitter, Twitch, Discord, and Patreon. And I'm working on doing some stuff for Instagram and TikTok as well after coming back from TwitchCon in San Diego. I've had a lot of ideas and I'm now trying to kind of like push everything together so that I can focus on some other stuff. I am going to be focusing on stuff outside of Dissidia as well. I would love it if you guys would join me on that journey. If you'd like to know more details on everything like that, I do have a video where I talk about all of these things, my time over in San Diego. If you would like to watch that as well, it would be lovely to give you guys some insight into where I'm at as a creator. And of course, I cannot forget to shout out one of my patrons over on Patreon every time I release a video, as without you guys' support, I wouldn't be able to do anything like this, so I'm extremely grateful to all of you. But today's shout out is going to be going to Tree Void, who has Grahatia as their title card, and I love making these title cards. I'm actually doing a lot with my artwork stuff at the moment, and I'm hoping to some point soon release some merchandising, which should be really fun as well, so that's something that you guys have to look forward to too. And of course, last but not least, don't forget to check out all of the other content creators and resources out there for Dissidia Opera Omnia as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at this banner then, shall we? So this is going to be one of Rinoa's BT batches, so obviously Rinoa is going to be a part of that, but only with her BT. Aerith is going to be returning with all of her kit, including her brand new FR. She gets a massive rework as well. Kurasame is returning with his LD and is also getting his rework and C90. And then Alphino is also coming along as well with just a reprint and force enhancements. Nothing too out there for him. And honestly, Alphino is the last character that you should be putting on. As somebody who loves him, he is terrible in this era because his main mechanic doesn't scale very well with force time, and outside of that he does have some nice benefits like unbreakability, but it's just not enough to carry him through the Shinryu as far as we're in now. So big shout outs of course to Mediu over on Reddit for these translations, but we're going to take a look at Kurasame first. Kurasame, as many of you will know, because he's a character that many players have the LD for, is directly designed to enchant and imperil for ice, as well as providing the Hyoro debuff, which makes it so that the enemy takes greater HP damage depending on how far along in the 5 stacks you have the Hyoro debuff. And it's still to this day one of the best LD calls that you can have access to, because it just does so much offensively on its own that it's very, very useful. So if you don't have access to Kurasame, it's worth it just for that, especially if you like to use Kamlanaut. If you've used Kamlanaut before, you know he needs Ice Enchant as part of his FR, so it's a big deal for him as well. If you happen to have Kamlanaut but not Kurasame, you may want to consider grabbing him. And that's without taking his his rework here into account. So he also has some offensive auras for the party through his Warm Gaze buff, so attack, HP damage up, Brave damage up, that kind of thing as well. He now gets additional HP dumps across the board for both of his skill 1 and skill 2. He now starts with his LD buff, which is nice, and gets additional HP buffs for HP dumps from his LD. And then the EX also gives you Ice Pillar, which if you haven't used Kurasame in your party for a hot minute like I haven't, then you may have forgotten the fact that this even exists, but it is a follow-up attack. Whenever Kurasame attacks something, you get additional HP dumps on it. So given that Ice Reaper, his EX, and Absolute Zero, his LD, have 5 HP dumps on it, followed by a double HP dump on it through Ice Pillar, it actually adds up to a pretty solid amount of damage, considering that he's mostly a support character, and he's there to provide that ice damage and also the Hyoro debuff. Will you use him all of the time? No, not necessarily, but in this kind of elemental lockout period where, and this event is a candidate for that by asking for ice damage, he certainly does the job well for what he's doing, and if you don't have that LD call, it's still really good. So now moving on and looking at Aerith. Aerith also gets a huge rework here and obviously gets a brand new kit and a brand new costume, which is to die for. If you've played FF7 Remake, you'll know how nice this costume is. So her rework, to go into sort of like a nice easy step, both of her her abilities are instant turn rate with like extra usage. Doesn't really do a huge amount. I believe Prayer of the Cetra, it says high turn rate here, but I think in combination with her 35 CP and her other buffs, it is actually instant turn rate, but I could be incorrect on that. But that being said, because she has so many uses of Healing Wind and it being an instant free turn, then you also have an FR charger on your hands here, which is wonderful. And considering that you get quite so much damage out of her, which is surprising from her other skills, it's nice to know that she can do damage and she can charge the FR gauge really, or the force gauge really quickly. So the main kind of thing that Aerith has is her Seal Evil. And so her Seal Evil LD gives her a buff that gives your party complete debuff immunity, and also gives an enemy, or gave an enemy up until now, the Planet's Admonition debuff, which stops them from buffing. This has now been changed to have like an AoE effect and lasts longer, so you are almost always going to be able to prevent the enemy from buffing or debuffing you, which is pretty huge actually. So the Seal Evil buff gives you that and gives offensive buffs as well, but you actually get a follow-up attack that puts the Planet's Admonition on the enemies every time she does something. So whenever she does an attack, whether like anything that does damage, you get a double AoE HP dump on top of that now, which when you look at Seal Evil, 4 HP dumps, it's kind of nice. You get 6 HP dumps on top of all of the massive healing, HP regens, all the things that she does. And now she also gets HP attack Seal Evil, which she didn't have before, which is now a high turn rate, triple HP dump, so 5 HP dumps if you include the extra attack that's added on. And yeah, like lovely stuff there. And then when you go into her EX, now her EX's main thing was she was one of the first characters when her EX came out that gave like Brave Overflow and stuff like that. So obviously in this day and age that's not really enough anymore. So we'll stick 6 HP dumps on it, because why not? And then have another 2 on top of it. It's quite surprising how much damage you can get out of Aerith. It's the same like Kurasame. You can get a lot of damage out of her, considering that she's primarily there as a support character. And she is like an FR charger because of her instant turn rate skills. There's a lot to like here without even looking at her FR. So you have buff blocking, debuff immunity, really strong healing, a kick-ass costume, I will keep going back to that kick-ass costume, and a surprisingly large amount of damage and bravery battery while you're at it. It's all good stuff for Aerith. Aerith's FR weapon pairs her up with Ico and is a unique at this point, FR in that it doesn't actually do any damage. It brave batteries, it is instant turn rate, and it heals the party. And then you also start off your force time with an attack like this slightly higher, so 150% as opposed to the 120% you'd get from a damaging FR. Then the force time effect asks for a turn using a bravery or HP attack command. That's been changed, so very similar to Charlotta. And then when a turn passes with character, that's brave batterying other characters, which is extra 20% and 20% more if she's doing it. So it can be really powerful. The problem I have with it is that the two things that she wants don't necessarily go together. Like, they are very, very good, but you can't necessarily like spam her sort of skill 1 because it's not a changed brave or HP attack to then get like 80% every time. You'll get a lot, but there are other ways in which you can do that with other characters. And 40% HP regen on top of it, also really nice, unless of course you're using Rinoa, who wants her HP to be low. But I think that Aerith is perfectly functional without her FR weapon. Is her FR weapon really good? Yeah, it is. Like, there's no two ways about that, and there's a lot of benefits to be had with it, especially considering that later down the line she comes back with her FR and also gains a BT, which is pretty stonking powerful from what I know. So that is something to consider, but I personally will not be pulling on Aerith purely for the basis of the fact that I think Aerith is good enough without her FR weapon that I don't need it. So it means that I can save my high power stones for when she comes back around again, although she is released in a pretty hefty area when she comes back. She's released alongside some very, very strong characters then as well, so whether you decide to pull here now or later is going to be entirely up to you. But if you have the LDs that are already present here, and obviously not the FR because it's not out yet, you do already have some pretty great tools at your disposal. So now let's take a look at the event that comes with Aerith, which is her intersecting will. So first things first, big shout outs of course to DissidiaCompendium.com for their information that's granted here. Thank you ever so much. So we have the Griffins. We've fought these loads and loads of times, and honestly the main shtick of this, considering that it's an intersecting wills, and intersecting wills are more often pretty easy compared to a lot of events that we get out there now, is that they take 0 damage from anything that isn't ice, and the way to counter their force time is to use an FR attack that doesn't deal bravery damage, so Aerith basically. But that being said, you'll probably not see most of the mechanics in this fight, considering that the enemies only have 85 million HP each. So whether you're using the likes of Rinoa, or Tifa, or Machina, or any major damage dealer, as long as you're enchanting them for ice, you're probably not even going to see most of the mechanics here. At this point in time, I mean, they do have some pretty nasty attacks if you allow them to get their force gauge up, and if they do get their force attack off, then they don't take HP damage from non-force abilities, and like pretty much at all. So you have to let them like play their force time out, and their attacks do nasty things while they're off the ground, so that they inflict some nasty debuffs like Charm, so you can't act, Bane, so you take more HP damage, and then they'll be buffing themselves in the process. But like I said, this is one of those events where unless you're actively making it hard for yourself by taking characters that allow the enemies to take turns, you can easily just take any character that charges the force gauge. Special mention goes to Luna Freya here, because she obviously enchants the party for ice. Just don't use her FR ability and enchant the party for water as well, because then you're not dealing any damage whatsoever. And then you can take your Kanes, your Kors, your Selfies, your Rinoas, your Kurasames, obviously, any tank if you wanted to do it that way. There's so many things you could have done here to make it really easy. It's an intersecting wills. If you're not like smashing these, then you might want to start thinking about which characters you take to some of these events. So now, of course, it's time for Would You Pull, the section of the video where you, the viewer, get your chance to let your voice be heard regarding these banners. And of course, a massive shout out goes out to all of my patrons for casting their votes and their comments on this particular banner. So let's have a look here. 18% of people said they were going to use gems on this banner, 55% of people said they were going to use 100 or more tickets, 9% they were going to use less than 100 tickets, and 18% of people said no thanks. So I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm actually skipping this banner, and it's for 2 major reasons. The first of which is that I've tokened Rinoa's BT already, and I did that to kind of encourage the second reason, which is I actively want to miss an FR, which sounds ridiculous because I've actually been very fortunate in getting all of the FRs up until this point. But considering that I plan to use Aerith without her FR, and quite happily so as well, by not having her FR, it breaks the idea that I have to have every FR as it's released, and it won't encourage me to pull on things I don't necessarily need for completionism's sake, because I think that that's a very dangerous mindset to get into. And obviously, if you've been fortunate for a little while, which, you know, I have been, I did pity T for BT, but I still got the FRs along the way. You know, it's one of those things that I think is good for a mental reset, as it were, so that I can kind of go, okay, do I actually need this? And in the case of Aerith, while her coming around again with like the Zac FR and her own BT is going to be expensive, I'd like to reevaluate my resources and check where I am with the game when that comes back around again, because it has been an expensive couple of weeks for me. 500 G tokens and 50 BT tokens across Tifa and Rinoa is pretty expensive, but it does still mean that I can then use this opportunity to save, despite the fact that I do actually think Aerith FR is very good. So let's go into some comments here. Fernie says, yep, gems and tickets because she's my FF waifu, but in all reality she's a great support unit with the ability to build the gauge for days, and it saves me resources when her BT comes out later with her great FR Echo. We'll come to FR Echo another day. We're not talking about that today. That's a whole other kettle. That's an whole other can of worms. I've been waiting for her for months, and now even more excited for her for when her BT comes around with Best Boy Zac's FR. I do think that it's important to take stock of when you'll use an FR. Like, I've definitely been guilty of this, so it's definitely not me not being hypocritical, but there have been FRs that I've maxed out. Sabin's a great example of this, where I've gone, oh yeah, I'll use it all the time. and then I didn't because I didn't. So it's one of those things that I think if you're gonna invest into Aerith, make sure you actually find ways of using her that use the FR and not something you could have done without it. But it, like I said, it is very good. It's a proper support unit. Like, she's a great unit to build the FR gauge, perhaps for somebody else or herself, and she can do a lot with what she gets. Tree Void says, I finally dried on high power stones, so I'll be skipping Aerith for now. Too many FRs I'm more excited for coming up soon in Minwu, Hope, Vance, Celes, Reigns, etc. Her FR isn't one I'm terribly excited for anyways. It's a bit too restrictive for me with those Charlotta style conditions. As somebody who already has her base kit otherwise though, this is a great tuning pass, and Aerith provides a lot of useful utility via stopping the enemies from both buffing themselves and debuffing you. I am in exactly the same place here. Like, as much as I have other reasons as to why I'm not pulling for Aerith FR, all of the reasons that are stated here, I definitely agree with. I do think that, I have Charlotta for that type of thing already, and I really like using Charlotta still. And if I need somebody that's going to be doing the buff and debuff, like prevention, then I can use Aerith without her FR for that. And so therefore I don't need to cross that over. And, all of the FRs that you've mentioned here, they're all ones that I want to, and I'm sure many players do. And then finally, Louis Tomato says, I plan to use probably about 200 tickets on the Aerith banner. I don't have her or Kurasame's kits and would like to at least get their LDs for the sake of cool abilities. While I do want Kurasame's FR and BT down the road, if I can get him at least somewhat set up now, then that's less resources I have to spend later. Not sure how I feel about Aerith BT down the road, but if it's good, I might just pity it later on with BT tokens. I mean, that's also a factor. I mean, Kurasame also gets an FRBT that's pretty good as well later on. But the era that we're entering in the JP side of things is quite different to what we have now, because they're getting BTs with every character, they only have one event a week. There's a lot of difference between the way that they're playing the game and the way that we are. So honestly, I think the best thing to do from a personal standpoint is to look at the now, or at least the near future, and see how you want to plan your resources for that period of time. Because Vaughn, Celes, Minwu, Hope, all of those are really good. Sid Reigns, all of those are really strong characters, so they're all characters you may want to consider before throwing down with Aerith. If you don't have her LD or anything though, definitely worth a look. So now we come to the big question of the banner, should you pull on it? Honestly, I think it depends on you, realistically. If you don't have any of their kits, there's a lot of value in this banner. Like, a heavy amount of value on this banner, actually. Kurasame is still an extraordinary LD call, and especially if you like Kamnanor, then you're going to want an Ice Enchant call, because it goes hand in hand with him. And now, because he's got all these HP dumps and he's had some improvements to his auras and stuff, he's pretty solid in the party now as well, and because of Elemental Lockout content, it's nice to have access to multiple different elements so that you always have somebody that you can reach for in order to go for those things. And then Aerith, Aerith is great. There's no two ways about it. Aerith has a lot going for her, especially with her LD only kit, and if you happen to have her FR as well, it does add stuff to her. You can charge the FR gauge pretty hefty with Aerith, but you can also do that with a lot of other characters. I think that the real draw to Aerith is the ability to prevent debuffs and your enemy from buffing themselves, and to do so with a bizarrely large amount of damage, considering Aerith's role as a healer supporter character. She's also a great FR charger. She's great for charging that gauge, getting it up there. Whether you decide to use it on her own FR or someone else's is entirely up to you. I think that some players may want to consider saving until she comes back around again, when her BT comes around and it has a much greater impact, and having her FR has a much greater impact than it probably does now. But because she functions so well with just her LD kit, some people may just want to save up Power Stones, some people may want to have access to it now so they don't have to pull for it later. Alphino, I wouldn't even look at, if I'm honest. I love Alphino. We know I love Alphino. He's just not worth your time at this point. But all in all, it's a solid banner. So that's going to be all for today's video on Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. Do let me know in the comments below whether you're planning on pulling on Aerith FR or Kurasame if you didn't get him the first time. And also, I would love to hear your ideas of other content that I'm making. I'm kind of in this too many ideas, need to focus things down a little bit, and I've been changing my scheduling for my streaming, and I've had some really positive feedback from doing so. So thank you very much for that. And for those of you who have watched like the last couple of videos I've made where people were asking me questions about TwitchCon, about like the direction of the channel, really appreciate those of you that took the time to speak to me about stuff like that, because it really is very valuable having people's input and feedback and criticism even. Like, you know, there's a lot of things that this channel is trying to transform into, and I know that I have a tendency to kind of recoil when I get back, when you know, things don't go to plan. But I need to be brave and sort of carry on in that direction. But that doesn't mean, and I hope that this video like kind of alleviates the fear that I'm dropping Dissidia, because I'm really not. Like, I never said that I was dropping it. I've said I wanted to shift focus, but I never said I was dropping the game. So hopefully this gives people a bit of an alleviation on that front as well, because I've definitely been asked that a load. But yes, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications on any future videos I might be making. And I'll see you next time, beautiful. Have a great day.